Good evening and welcome to What's Your Story? I'm your host, James Ransom Reed Jr. This is part 2 of an interview that I have with a very special guest. It is my honor and privilege to continue this interview with the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Again, Mr. President, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mr. President, we closed off with you talking about your Emancipation Proclamation. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that, sir?
All I would say is that when I proposed the idea to members of my cabinet in July of 1862, they were in general agreement to it. But Secretary of State Seward said that I ought to wait until there was a military victory. Otherwise, it would look like a desperate act of and last shriek of a retreating administration. So I had to wait for there to be a military victory. And when Antietam occurred and Bobby Lee left the field, even though it was somewhat of a draw and no one gained any appreciable ground, I said, well, that is good enough victory for me. So I issued it on September 22nd, and that gave those slave owners in areas of rebellion 100 days fair notice. And January 1st, if they didn't come around, then I would sign the Emancipation Proclamation.
Thank you, sir. Mr. President, as president, you have to deal with all manner of circumstances and situations. I suspect that my viewing audience would be interested to know, what do you think of abolitionists, Mr. President? I knew you grew up around them, but what do you really think of abolitionists? What do you think of the little woman that wrote the book that caused the Great War? What do you think of that stuff, Mr. President?
Well, I would say that they are certainly on the right in terms of people are not property, that people always struggle against bondage. Certainly our country was founded on trying to liberate ourselves from the tyranny of King George III. So everybody can appreciate at least some aspect about not having true liberty. So those abolitionists are certainly convinced of their position, and in their strident way they are doing the good work, but that is not always the way of a politician who always tries to not get too far ahead of the general public, but tries to nudge them in that direction so that they will support what you are doing.
In general, sir, what keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night is the people of the North who eventually will get tired of this war, who will no longer support the enormous bloodshed and hardships that the families who are sending off their boys to fight are incurring. Because I want to keep this country intact. It is certainly a country worth fighting for. It's an inestimable jewel. And so I am trying to do my part to keep explaining what the purpose of this war is and why we are so we must be determined to carry it out. When I was a young man, I looked so highly at the founders of this country and looked at the Declaration of Independence and said that, look at all of the good things that they had done. What good thing is there around us for people of my generation to do? And since 1861, it is now clear what we must do.
You know, Mr. President, there are people who float the idea I don't know why. Why didn't you just let them go?
Because they had no right to leave without the other states agreeing for them to leave. And in addition, this was called the Great Rebellion. And I, like so many,
Yes.
felt that it is the right of people to rebel against a tyrannical government for the right reasons, which is why the people of our revolution were such in the right. But a rebellion today, in order to keep people enslaved, is not the right justification for rebellion. That is wrong, and that is why we need to get rid of slavery and keep this country intact as one country.
Why is it wrong, Mr. President?
People are not property. Everyone has their own dignity. And as I said in the Gettysburg Address, all men are created equal. And it is those who love liberty. And liberty is an expansive concept, not a restrictive concept, which is why in the Gettysburg Address, I said a new birth of liberty, that we should expand that concept of freedom to those in the Negro race.
Mr. President, it's no great secret to say that you've had your problems with the press. On August 19th, 1862, New York Tribune writer Horace Greeley, I'm sure you're familiar with Mr. Greeley, attacked you for failing to free slaves in view of the Conscription Act. You responded on August 22nd, in part, with the following: I would save the Union. I would save it the shortest way under the Constitution. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would do that too. You felt you got Mr. Greeley where he lives, sir, with that reply?
Well, that passage that you just read, I had previously written that, and I was always writing things to myself. And so I took what I wrote and I adapted it a little bit, and I sent it off not to Mr. Greeley up in New York City, but I had it printed in a Washington paper just to let Mr. Greeley know that I did not appreciate being spoken to that way. And when Mr. Greeley looked at my response, he said, he didn't answer my question. But in my response, I wanted to give the people of the North a hint about what I was going to do, which was I will leave some slaves where they are, and I will free some others in areas of rebellion once I announce that I will sign the Emancipation Proclamation at such and such a time in the future. I ended that letter by saying, I have here stated my purpose according to what I view as my official duty, and I intend no modification of my oft expressed personal wish that all men everywhere could be free. Yours very truly, A. Lincoln.
Mr. President, wow, that response is moving to me, sir. Mr. President, you have had so many incidences in your life that have been tragic, and this war, as a matter of fact, is one such example, sir. How's it impacted your family, sir?
Well, it certainly has certainly been hard on my wife because of the hours that I'm away to, whether I'm at the telegraph office, whether I'm in McClellan's headquarters, whether I'm visiting the troops in the field, because that business is so pressing. And yet at the same time, my wife is able to refurbish the White House because President Buchanan had left it in a shambles. We had to get new furniture that some of the chairs could not even hold my weight, and I don't weigh that much. So we had to outfit the White House. When I first moved into the White House, my two boys, Willie and Tad, they had great fun in this mansion. And my son Willie, he had such a sharp mind that he memorized all of the train schedules going in and out of between Washington and Baltimore. So he would stand at the top of the stairs and he would announce when trains were arriving and when they were departing. And so they had a great time. And they would also play with two children who lived nearby, and they would play soldiers outside, and my son Tad had a doll named Jack, and he would make up all sorts of stories about the doll. And one time they had Jack be a spy, and they caught Jack the spy, and they were going to hang him, and yet they knocked and they gained entrance into my office, and they asked that I write a pardon for the doll Jack. So I took out a piece of paper and I wrote, "This doll Jack is hereby pardoned. A. Lincoln."
Mr. President, you spend a lot of time at the Soldiers' Home, sir. Why did you go there, sir?
It was slightly cooler. It was a little higher up, and it was about a 45-minute horseback ride to the Soldiers' Home. And so Washington can be a very difficult town to live in the best of times, and in the summertime it just gets oppressive. And so if there's ever any breeze to be had, it's up at the Soldiers' Home. So that's where I spent my summers, and Secretary of War Stanton and his family also stayed up there as well.
Mr. President, it's been said about you that you have dreams. You care to discuss some of them with us, sir?
Well, one of the dreams that I had is that shortly after I was elected, and this is back in Springfield, I went up to my law office and I lay down on the couch and I looked at this tall mirror, and as I looked over, I saw the strangest thing. I saw two faces. Not just one of my faces, but actually two faces. And one of those faces was almost like in shadows. It was a little grayer. And when I looked away and I looked back, they were there again. And that they kept appearing that evening. And it bothered me so much that I went back days afterwards and tried to see if I could see those two faces again. I couldn't make it happen. But I went and I told my wife what I had seen in the mirror. And she said, "What it means is that you will be elected a second time, but the darkened face means that you won't live to see till the end of that second time." we will not speak any further about this.
Earlier in our first interview, Mr. President, you talked about Frederick Douglass. What manner of man?
Frederick Douglass, as I came to say about him, is one of the most meritorious men in the country. He did not always have the most flattering things to say about me. When I first became president, I told members of my cabinet, my policy is not to have a policy. And Frederick Douglass wrote that an administration without a policy is an administration without brains. But nevertheless, as I came to hear more about him and he came to see me the first time, as he came into my office, he started to introduce himself to me, and I stopped him and I said, I know all about you. Mr. Seward has told me about you, and I have read about you. Please sit down. And so we had a frank discussion because he explained why he was so disappointed that I was so slow enlisting the Negro into the military. And I was so slow about giving them equal pay. And I had to respond to him in a clear way, which was the reason for my hesitancy is that the country is not ready for it. The Negro is a hated man, a despised man throughout the country. And if I came out too soon with such a proclamation, all the hatred poured on the Negro race would be visited on this administration. They would say, we thought it would come to this. White men are to be killed for Negroes. Preparatory work had to be done, and it has been done. And once I took the position, no man could say that I have ever contradicted it or retreated from it. And when he left that meeting, he said that it was understandable why I was doing what I did in my position and counter to what he was doing in his position. By the second time we met, which was the summer of 1864, the war was not going well. And McClellan was likely to be the Democratic nominee for president, and it was likely that he would be elected, at which time it was likely that slavery would continue to exist and there would be two countries. So I asked Douglass to deputize a number of his men to go down to the South and bring up as many people as possible before McClellan took office, because I feared that if they were not coming north, then they would be forever trapped down there. And it was after that meeting that Mr. Douglass realized how deeply convinced and convicted I was to carry out ridding this country of the scourge of slavery.
You believe in God, Mr. President?
I do believe in God.
Why, sir? You were contemptuous of religion as a young man.
Well, I have to say that I have many of my stories make fun of all kinds of people, including preachers. But that doesn't mean that I am not a God-fearing man. As president, I was given a handsome brand new Bible, and I said that this was God's greatest gift to mankind. It is the best book. And I have read the Bible a number of times. However, I never joined a church because until I saw written above the altar that thou shalt love thy neighbors as thyself, that is the kind of church that I will belong to.
Do you believe that the better angels of our nature will prevail, Mr. President?
I do believe that there is such goodness in us, and it must be aroused in all of us. and together we are stronger than individually. So appealing to our goodness is always a better way to unite people. It is so easy to divide people. And therefore appealing to people who are not related to each other and appealing to their goodness, their caring for their fellow man is the best way to go forward together.
What do you see as the future of race relations in America, Mr. President?
Well, I would have to say that after those regiments, such as those in Maryland, such as the 54th Massachusetts, who the New York Times wrote after the attack on Fort Wagner, even though they were repulsed, the New York Times said, Fort Wagner will be for the black man what Bunker Hill is for the white man. And many of the white officers who were at one time against the enlistment of black men in the military were now heartily in favor of it once they saw the results. I feel that we are on our way to bringing those into the fold of a full-fledged citizenship of this country, including voting. And that's why I made a speech and I celebrated the fact that the new Constitution in the state of Louisiana gave the legislature the privilege, the right to, if they so chose, to allow those black men of suitable condition to vote. And that is the primary vehicle by which our democracy lives. And so I think we are on our way to achieving liberty for all and getting closer to a more perfect union.
Mr. President, do you have any words you'd like to leave with the country tonight about its future and where you are and what your plans are, sir?
Well, I once made a speech in 1838 to the Men's Lyceum in Illinois. And in that speech, I explained that I was fearful of what was starting to, I saw in this country. There was a rise of mob rule. And I feared that we as a democracy could go the way of other democracies were, which was in times of chaos, a man such as Napoleon, as well as others who became dictators and tyrants, could rise up and take over the government. And so I said that I feared that if we fall and falter, it will not because of some foreign entity coming to our shores. It will come from within. We will do it by suicide, and we must guard against it. When I was president, I was invited to raise the flag at a flag raising ceremony. And what I said in my brief remarks was, my task is to raise the flag, which I shall do, and when up, it shall be for the American people to keep it up. That is our charge.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's all the time we have for my interview with the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time, I'm your host, James Ransom Reed, Jr. Good night.
Riverview Apartments is Bristol's two-time beautification award-winning residence community for adults age 55 and older. They offer 1 or 2 bedroom apartments with modern appliances, air conditioning, wall-to-wall carpet, and tiled floors. Both heat and hot water are included. Riverview also offers a wide range of activity rooms that include a billiard parlor and a spacious community room. It is handicap accessible with safe, secure parking for tenants and ample off-street parking for visitors. 860-940-6757 or riverviewbristol.com.